Hello, and welcome back to France Made Simple, the podcast where I demystify life in France, debunk some of the myths that surround living here, moving here, or even buying property here, and generally tell it like it is. So, on the subject of buying property, we have a guest with us today, Paul Simper, who has been on the show before. And Paul is a property finder. Right. Note, not an estate agent, a property finder. So we thought it would be quite good to chat today about some of the pitfalls that can come up when you're looking at or going through the purchasing process in France, and particularly in terms of looking at properties. So, hello, Paul. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me again.
No, pleasure's all mine. So, this is something that does come up quite a lot, and I don't know if you'd noticed, but there's been a whole thread on the forum on Survive France in the last 2-3 weeks from somebody who had fallen in love with a property, having seen it online, and obviously the reality didn't quite live up to the vision that he had in his head when they went to visit it. And that kind of led into a whole discussion about the pitfalls of the purchasing process and choosing properties, finding properties. So I thought, as you are actually a property finder, it would probably be good to talk about some of the things that people should be aware of and maybe be looking out for. All right. So, in no particular order, what would be your kind of top, or not top tip, but what are the sort of the most important things that people should be aware of when they're starting on that journey to find a property in France?
Yeah, so in essence, in reality, the fundamental foundation of the industry is similar to what people would recognize and be comfortable with in the UK. So if you're UK based, it's very similar in terms of you will contact an estate agent and they will show you properties. And those estate agents it is their job not only to show you and sell you properties, but also to act on behalf of the seller, which is the main reason why I set up doing what I do now, is because unlike in the States, it's very different. So in the States, they have an agent on the buying side that acts purely for the buyer, and an agent on the seller side that acts purely for the seller. So that way, both parties can be comfortable with sort of a sense of impartiality. In Europe, that we don't have that. The Americans find that very difficult to get their head round. That the person that they're sharing a property with is also got a relationship with the seller. But in the UK, it's the same. The main difference to the UK is that the market moves a lot slower. So I have a client at the moment based in America, and the process to even get through the door of seeing properties for them is proving quite laborious and tedious. So the first thing I would say is be prepared for a slower wheel of motion than you would be used to in the UK. Be prepared
Yeah.
for agents to not be as proactive. From my own personal experience buying a property here, sometimes you will contact an agent to see a property and they just don't get back to you. That's not uncommon. Sometimes you need a bit of persistence. But the
And
main thing, yeah, go on.
no, I was going to, there were two questions that have come up already is, do you think like the USA model where you have a representative, both buyer and seller, do you think that is a better way of working? Is that more effective? Because I know that American sales seem to go through faster. That was the other question, and now I've completely lost my thread. The second question was whatever you were just saying, but now it will come back to me. But no, I was intrigued as to what you think of the American approach. Is it more effective to have two people negotiating so the buyer and seller don't have to do that?
Yeah, I wasn't myself coming from the UK. I wasn't I didn't understand that myself. I didn't understand the American model myself. The reason why my eyes were open to it is because when I was actually an agent myself, I was dealing, probably three-quarters of the people I was dealing with were from North America. So having discussions with them sort of opened my eyes to it. Um, and I think it makes more sense. I think it means that both sides of the transaction can be comfortable that they are getting a service that is purely for them. The problem with the European model, but particularly the French model, is that you're, as an agent, you are conflicted. Or you can be the most honest person in the world, but you know that you're not going to get. Unlike in the UK, the vast majority of agents here will only get paid if they make a sale. It's commission only. There's no base salary. Um, the ones that do have base salary will be few and far between. It's not that they don't exist. They do exist, but they're just not as common. So the hunger to make sales is even more intense here for that reason, and also, as previously said, the market moves slower. Unfortunately, what that encourages, and it's not to say that all agents are like this because they're not,
Hmm.
it does encourage nefarious behavior. It does encourage sort of behavior that is not honest in inverted commas, which means that you, as a buyer, need to be fully aware that if you're dealing with an estate agent rather than someone like me, a consultant or a property finder, they are acting on other people's interests as well as yours. So you've got to be aware of that. Um,
Yeah. Well, that was my second question, the one that I couldn't remember, but now I can, which is really interesting because if the agents, excuse me, are so hungry for a sale and for their commission, which is understandable if they are commission only, then why is it so difficult to get agents to get back to you? Because this is, again, something that comes up time and time again. People will say that, if they're trying to organise a viewing trip, they're trying to line up a selection of properties, and the agents just don't get back to them.
I think there's two reasons for that. The firstly is cultural. So even though entrepreneur is a French word, or at least French sounding, they don't stereotypically really understand what that means. So the drive to do business isn't as ingrained as it is in the UK, or even less so than in the US. Um, there's a cultural underlying reason there as well. But also because of the commission only nature of the business, it entices and attracts people that need some flexibility to their work life balance, and that means that sometimes their life otherwise is going to get in the way. So those two reasons sort of drive that. Um, and you'll find that some agents, they start out thinking they're going to make loads of money doing this, that, and the other, and slowly realize it's actually quite hard work,
Mm.
and not really for them. So those two reasons are mainly why it's difficult. That sort of encapsulates most of them. I hesitate to sort of come down on sort of uh, a xenophobic set stereotype, but I have found, generally speaking, that the agents that I have dealt with and collaborate with, both in my previous role and my current role, that tend to be more proactive are the non-French ones. It's not to say that there aren't proactive French agents out there, because of course there are, but I've found that the agencies, certainly in my part of the world, that have a strong Anglo-Saxon presence, have a much more defined and structured way of working than the purely French ones. That's not to label them all, but because like with anything, be that sort of a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker, whatever, you're going to get good ones and you're going to get bad ones, and you're going to get bad reputation with agencies that. You'll have good agents that work for agencies that had bad reputations, and vice versa. You'll have bad agents that work for agencies that have good reputations. And that's exactly the same in the UK as well. You're not going to get um, the same service across the board. Um,
Sure.
but going back to sort of other things to look out for, one of the main differences in a positive way to the UK is that once you get to the stage where you have found the property you want, you've put an offer down, and you're in the process, that process is much more structured and defined than it is in the UK. So there is the equivalent of exchange, which is called promesse de vente, and then the equivalent of completion, which is called acte de vente. And once the acte de vente is signed, the keys are in your hand and you are legally the owner of the property. Once you're in that process and the promesse is signed, it is then written during the promesse de vente when the acte de vente is going to be. So particularly for international purchases, that's really, really useful, because you know that you are going to become the legal owner of your dream property on, say, the 28th of June. So you can go around and make all of the logistical arrangements behind that international move, knowing that you are picking up the keys on the 28th of June.
Yeah.
In the UK, it's much more fluid and much more difficult. So you are much more beholden to the chain.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
it's
no, I
less.
mean, I think that's a big plus in France, actually. It's that sense of reassurance that once that compromis devant or promesse devant has been signed, things are in motion, and you know that that property is, barring a sort of act of God or something, really unusual circumstances, that property is yours. So, and when you look at the UK system, where things can collapse at the 11th hour and people are all waiting in their houses, waiting for the solicitors to phone each other saying, it's okay, you can exchange the keys now. It just seems, a really bizarre system in comparison to the French one.
Absolutely. That's probably the only positive thing that I can say in terms of differences between the UK and the US system. Um, but it does give you that sense of certainty. However, once you're in that process, there are lots of things that you need to be aware of, that if you haven't got a good agent acting on your behalf, either an estate agent or someone like myself, you might not be aware of if they don't let you know. One of the main things is that nearly always the list price is inclusive of any agency fees. So quite often people make the mistake of thinking that's all they need to pay. However, the equivalent of stamp duty exists in France just as it does in the UK, and just as property tax does in the US or anywhere else in the world. So that's a really important thing that people need to
Mm,
factor in. So there's no sort of, this is exactly how much you're going to pay, because at the end of the day, it's the notaire that will say that to you and tell you how much you need to pay once you're in the process. But you're looking around 7 to 8% generally of the purchase price, which, if you've got a budget and you haven't factored in, could mean the difference between you securing that property and losing it.
yeah.
Uh, so that needs to be factored in. Factor in at least 7 to 8% on top of your budget to, or inclusive in your budget rather,
Mm,
to be able to move forward. The Another pitfall with the process in France is that people get lulled into particularly Brits actually get lulled into a false sense of security by um, something called the diagnostic report, which is a legal requirement for all sellers to provide for the sale to go forward. It's something that they have to provide in order for the promesse, the compromis, to go forward. Now, lots of people get lulled into a false sense of security because it is quite a thick and detailed report, and they normally go
mm,
into 100, pages. And people think that that means that that's the equivalent of sort of the home buyer's report in the UK. It is not. There are many things which are not included in the diagnostic that, as a purchaser, you should be aware of, or at
yeah.
least and so the big difference between here and the UK is that there's no structural survey report that's included in that. So if you are worried about anything structurally, you will need to get um, additional consultants or surveyors to do that for you.
Yeah.
Um, so things like structural surveys, plumbing is not included, for example. Um, so anything, or the roof, which would come under the structural survey, anything
Yeah.
like that, I think might be an issue even now. Yeah, you need to get someone to have a look at. If you don't have the expertise or knowledge yourself, you need to get someone to have a look at.
Yeah.
The problem in France with that is that in the UK, I'm not entirely sure of the process in the US, but in the UK, you can pay a few £100s, a few £1,000s for a chartered surveyor to go and do that for you. The there is no such equivalent in France at the same sort of price point. You will get people that will do a similar thing, but they are far, far more expensive. And again, sort of stereotypically French, because they're being paid for a service, they will look at it from the other angle. So whereas Brits will look at it to say, is there a reason why I shouldn't buy it? Like, is the roof falling in? The French will look at it as there are many reasons why you shouldn't buy it, and this is why. Not is the roof falling in, but there's a crack in here and there's this, that, and the other. So people will pay, you're probably looking healthy for maybe even 5 figures to get a survey like that done in France,
Mm.
particularly on large property. Um, and the justification for being paid is almost like I need to find a problem rather than just to give the reassurance, peace of mind that most buyers, international buyers, are looking for. So that's also something to be aware of. There are people that do a similar service that you would be used to in the UK here, but you will need someone like me or a good estate agent to recommend those, because they're not common. They're few and far.
No, yeah, they are very few and far between. That was exactly the phrase that I was going to use. And again, this is something that's come up time and time again, but the confusion that people experience when they're presented with the diagnostic, they think that that's going to cover everything. It clearly doesn't. And even people that know that it doesn't have been surprised when they've bought places where, toilets have been installed, but no plumbing from the toilet has been connected anywhere else. It's buyer beware, really, in France, unless you go down that full structural survey road. And as you say, it's very difficult to find those people. They are out there. If any structural surveyors are listening to this and want to get in touch and come on the podcast, give me a shout. I know there are a few around, and I know a lot of them are very booked up and do travel immense distances, especially those that are English speaking, because, it's building terms, technical stuff. And it's also, I think the whole house buying process is quite stressful. So if you can liaise with people speaking the same language, it does make it, that bit easier, even if you do speak French. But yeah, so I think that's definitely a big pitfall to look out for. What else?
So another thing that when you're in the process that is slightly different to the UK is that when you are at the compromis promesse devant stage, it is common practice in France to put down 5 to 10% of the total purchase price, which includes the notaires fees or stamp duty. Um, it's normally 10%, but I've been involved in sales where that has been negotiated down to 5, and it's basically whatever the seller is comfortable with. Now, there's a 10-day cooling off period once that has been signed. And if you decide to pull out after that 10 days, you lose said deposit. It is legally not refundable. So if you pull out after those 10 days, that's the easiest money that the seller probably has ever made, because they have done absolutely nothing and they've made a bit of money. So that is something to be aware of. If you've got said issues with property or questions about property, get those sorted out before the promise, because if it comes out that it's actually a sinkhole beneath the cellar and the house is going to disappear, and you find that out on the 11th day, there is no legal comeback. So even if you are factually and legally correct, you will still lose that deposit. So make sure your ducks are in a row from that perspective before you sign the promise. In most instances, you won't need to go down that route with structural surveys and additional things. But if you want that done, make sure they are done before you sign a promise, because otherwise you could lose a significant amount of money, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it unless it transpires that the seller has willfully misled the situation, or the agent has.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's a very good point, actually. And I do recall when we very first came to France a long, long time ago, I think the first property we bought was a private sale, but the second property we bought was through an agency, and they were very, very pushy about signing instantly,
mm,
and we were lucky. It was just a heap of stones, so it didn't really matter. There was nothing to flag in any, but, you know, I do look back on that and think, God, we were really stupid to have signed so fast without even, and it was just being, I would say actually manipulated by the agent who was just desperate to get that signed and know that in 10 days' time, job done. So I think beware very pushy agents as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we touched on, that's not uncommon. There are two other things that I probably wanted to mention. The other thing that I see a lot, particularly with American clients, is that people have this romantic notion of owning a property in France, be that a holiday home, retirement, full relocation, whatever. And the reality of that romantic notion doesn't really align. And it's much more common with Americans because France is geographically distant. So their understanding of the geographical situation of France is stereotypically limited, but also the culture. So I've had a search, or am involved in a search with a couple from America that are still deciding what part of France they want to move to. And the most important thing for the wife is the weather. Understandably, that was
Yeah.
one of the things that attracts most people when they
Yeah.
come to France. But the 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 search is still including other parts of France that won't give that to her. So you've got to be really sure, with the help of people like me or estate agents as well, that the part of France you're going to buy in is right for you. But also, it's quite easy to move to a part of France that you fall in love with, but the reality of living there, and actually the day-to-day life there doesn't fit. So the fact that France is 4 to 5 times the size of the UK with a similar population means it's much more spread out. So things you hear often with people's requirements in the UK is, I want to be within walking distance of the shops. It's not to say that thing doesn't exist, but that property is far less common than it would be in the UK. So be prepared that you're going to have to get in a car to drive at least 5 to 10 minutes to get um, to somewhere if you're looking for rural life. If you're not looking for rural life, fine. But and again, I come back to the Americans with this notion of owning a chateau in particular in France is wonderful. But when they get there, um, uh, they worry that the Starbucks that they go to every morning is actually a half an hour drive, or the local cinema is 20 minutes down the road. Things that they want in their day to day life that have been for many years in the States are not the same in France. So you've got to be absolutely certain that where you buy is where you want to stay.
Yeah.
I went to see a property a couple of weeks ago that was bought by an American couple. They fell in love with it. They absolutely loved everything about it. But when they moved there, they realized they hadn't done their due diligence. They didn't realize how far away it was from everywhere. It's not that far. It's 10 minutes down the road from the nearest town, which can offer you everything. But they weren't used to that 10-minute drive. They wanted it on their doorstep. So they put it on the market again within a week of buying it.
Wow.
Um, and that kind of thing, you really need to rely on someone to give you that advice, to really open your eyes to, you can't just simply pick up your life wherever that may be, plant it in France and have exactly what you want. You've got to be fully aware that France is a different country. One of my pet hates was a phrase I used to get a lot when I was an agent with Christie's, was that, oh, it doesn't work like that in the UK. Yeah, you're damn right it doesn't work like that in the UK, because you're not in the UK anymore, you're in France. And if you don't understand that, maybe moving to another country is not for you. You need to be well aware that France has its own unique culture, its own unique processes and laws and taxation and things like that. All of this due diligence. When you're making a big international move, you really, if you don't understand it yourself, you really need to ask someone that
Who
is
does?
going to tell you how it is and not sugarcoat
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing and final thing that is where I think I really come in is that the system in France, as I said, it encourages a certain way of working. And because it's commission only, most of the agents that work for agencies will be self-employed. They're just under the umbrella of the agency. So in effect, they're working for themselves. So when you contact, say, one agency, let's say Patrice Best for one of a better one, when you contact one agency and say, this is what I want, I've seen this property, but I'd like to see some similar ones as well. Be well prepared that even though you're talking to Patrice Bess, you could well be end up talking to four, five, half a dozen different agents within that Patrice Bess, and they're all working under the same umbrella. And you might think they're working in a collaborative way. That isn't necessarily the case, because if they don't make the sale, they don't make money. So they're going to want you to buy their property, not their colleague's property down the road. So you will end up having multiple conversations within one agency. So if you contact two, three, four agencies, you could be having upwards of a dozen to 20 conversations, all about the same thing, but with different people. So you're having the same conversation many,
Yeah.
many times again. And from my perspective, that's where I simplify the process, because I'm the single point of contact and I have all those conversations. And the active search I have going at the moment, I've been pulling my hair out because the agents that I've been trying to contact and get to see properties, they're not showing me these properties. They will eventually, but the process to get through the door is difficult. But it's my job. I'm being paid for that, to put up with that tedium, put up with the infuriating process. If you're doing it yourself, which is by no means impossible, just be prepared that it's going to get complicated and convoluted. And that's just France.
Yeah.
Like it, you have to deal with it.
Yeah, c'est la vie. C'est normal, as they say in France all the time, which is probably one of my favorite all-time expressions. C'est normal. You
Exactly.
can apply that to just about everything. Well, that was really interesting. Thank you so much for joining us again, Paul. Good luck with finding that elusive property that you're tearing your hair about currently. What are you looking for?
So it's an American couple, which they're coming through my door as well as other agents and agencies, traditional estate agencies, a lot, because whether you like it or not, the political situation in America is fairly uh,
Hmm.
polarized.
Yeah.
So particularly Californians are knocking on my door asking for help, looking for places. It's an American couple who are transferring their lives to France. And the long-term solution is to buy somewhere that is big enough to host um, things like yoga retreats, seminars, potentially small marriages and things like that. Something that will give them revenue generation going forwards, but also be somewhere for them to, which is quite a common thing. When I was at that agent, there was Brits were doing that as well. Whether you like it or hate it, things like Escape to the Chateau, they do drive business in my industry. Whether it's realistic business or not is neither here nor there, but it's leads.
All right. Well, good luck with that. And thank you very much again for joining us today. It was a pleasure, and we'll look forward to having you on again at some point soon.
Super. Obviously, any questions that you or anyone else has, don't hesitate to get in touch.
I will do, and I'll pop your contact details in the show notes so that anybody listening can get in touch with you directly. Thank you for listening, and thank you as always to our sponsors, Fab French Insurance, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Bye.